go. Okay, so when it comes to character mesh, let me just turn off this vertex normals display. So when you want, again, if you want to reset your mesh for unwrapping, what I would typically do is go to UV, delete UVs right off the bat. Okay, so that will allow you to kind of just toss out the UV data, and we're starting from a blank slate. I've already set up my basic Lambert with a checker pattern repeated 20 times. I have hit 6 on my keyboard so I can see that display in the viewport. If I go UV editor, clearly I see no UVs. So the way character mesh, especially like a more typical two-legged bipedal humanoid or human being, we would sort of look at their body for unwrapping almost like cutting apart clothing. So a lot of times you'd have seams along the sides of the torso, a seam around the upper shoulder area into the armpit, a seam in the underside of the arm, which would be hidden when the arm is typically at rest next to the body, and same thing for the legs. It'd be like jeans or pants. The feet would be like shoes, the hands would be like gloves, so there might be one big seam that goes through kind of the middle of the hand and the fingers. So I'll show you this process, and instead of using like the planar maps and cylinder maps like I've shown you guys, I'll use that to kind of get an initial base down. So I'll go to edge, go to actually face mode, and I'll start this roughly the same way on both parts of the arm here. So I'll start in this area of the arm, hold shift, double click to go around in a loop. So again, click this, shift, double click that. Then I'll hit shift period or shift greater than will expand the poly selection outwards from that area. So it's a very kind of good, quick way to get out. So I want to go right to the base of the hands, essentially to the end of the wrist. So you guys can see that there, right? I hope. And what I'll simply do to start is I'll do a very, very basic unwrap. I'll just simply go to UV planar. I'm not going to treat that as a way to, actually before I do that, I should say this as well. We take a look at the mesh selection. I'm not really crazy about this area being selected, so I want to deselect some of this stuff in the pit region. So I'm just going to tidy up this selection just a little bit on, yeah, let's do that. So do something like that. Okay. Let's check the back side of this guy. I think that's okay. Okay, so I like that area. I'm going to go to UV planar map. So the planar map for me is actually not a real unwrap. It's just a way to kind of set the outer borders of this. So if I go planar, you see that those borders now pop in and are highlighted, right? You kind of see that orange highlighting happening at the borders. Now the unwrap itself is not kind of accurate. It doesn't really represent a clean unwrap yet. It's just sort of a first stage to define the outer borders of those two shells, basically. My next step will actually be to go to polygons and do unfold. So unfold is kind of this magical algorithm that will try to flatten these out with as little distortion as possible. Now the problem is it's sort of flattening them out. So this is probably the wrist area and this is the shoulder area. So what I need to do is actually create a slice along here. So you almost want to imagine the arms and legs almost like cylinders or tubes. And you need to cut one side of the tube and flatten it out so it becomes almost more like a square patch. So for me to do that, I'm just going to go to edge mode. I can double click the edge, or I can start, let's say, from this edge here. I'll click it here, follow it along the arm, and shift double click to that border edge, which you can see highlighted in here, right? So if I shift right click in the UV editor and go to cut, it's going to create a new sort of seam or split in that shell. If I grab the shell and go to unfold, it's like magic. It flattens it out, and look at the checker. Now, 10 years ago when I had to do this assignment myself in college or university, we used to have to put a cylinder unwrapping tool around it, fit it, and then the seam would have to, you'd try to align it to the edges, and it wouldn't always fit the edges, so some polys would be jagged and off. And then you have to cut and stitch, and it would take you like 5 days to do it. You can do a character now in like 2 minutes. So hopefully this unwrapping thing will be a little quicker for you guys. So I'll do the same thing essentially on the other side. I'm going to take a look at this this shell piece. I think it's this seam here. So sometimes I find it easier. So I think if it's this edge right here, yeah, something like this edge, right? Sometimes I'll just double click it from here. The beauty of doing it is in here is that if I double click this edge, it only goes from one end of the loop to the other within the shell. It doesn't go beyond this. Like if I just double clicked one edge, it'll go all the way through the whole body, which I may not want to cut, right? So the beauty of doing it in here is like just finding that edge, quickly cutting, selecting it and cutting it, and then going to shell. So unfold, kind of, you know, doing a little extra cutting. You do the planer map, you cut, then you unfold it, and it's just a really, really fast, efficient way to unwrap, right? Now, I haven't packed anything yet. There's overlap here, which is a big no-no, so I'm going to have to take care of that next. Remember what I said about the hand? The hand is kind of like a glove. Yeah, sorry.
If you want, like, for example, like if you want these two arms to have the same texture on them, can you overlap them?
Right. So, yeah, I've had that question this morning. You can actually overlap them. You know, in this case, I'd probably have to try to align it in a certain way. I may have to flip it so that it lines up the same way. So if you wanted exact matching texture, you can do that. You can stack pieces. In this case, we're going to go about things in a more traditional way. So I want every piece to have its own UV space, but definitely you can reuse UVs and stack them so that the same part of that image will be reused multiple times. Like if you had 1,000 bolts, you wouldn't have all the bolts separated out. You just stack them and maybe randomize the rotation a bit in the UVs. So yeah, it's a good question. Edge mode. So for the hand, again, it's kind of like a glove. So I'll start from this edge, shift, double click down to this edge, and I believe we have to make a little bit of a weird turn here. Shift, double click to here. Is that? Yeah, I had the same problem this morning. Shift click here, shift, double click to there. Shift, double click that. These fingers actually work fairly nicely. So if I shift, double click, you see it runs through one finger into the tip of the next. So I'll pretty much just quickly do that. Shift, double click. And then shift, double click. Now you see this selection ran into the arm there. So I'm just going to deselect that part. So that's the hand. I'm going to just shift, right click and go cut UVs. So now I think if I go UV in the viewport, I'll go UV shell. Let's just do planer map on that. Actually, sorry, it didn't keep my edge selection for some reason, but that's okay. I'll try it again. So I'll shift, double click into the pinky. Shift, double click. So this part, when the model is laid out nicely too, this makes things a lot easier. That's why I really, when we get to modeling next year, I'm a big stickler for making sure your model is super clean, well laid out, easy to navigate for this part of production, because you don't want to screw over somebody else on your team, right? Okay, so I think that's good. Let me just make sure there's nothing selected over there. So you'll have to go back. So I'm going to recut these, and if I go back to shell, so I've got this shell piece and that weird shell piece. So I'll grab this shell piece. Let's try this. We'll go unfold. Now it's kind of broken up for some reason. Having a weird issue today. Let me undo a little bit. Okay, come on, Maya. So yeah, I'll try this one more time here. Let's do this. Okay, so I'll try describing this section here. Oops. Okay, so I think I've got the whole hand now. All right. So yeah, I'll just try another planer map on this guy. There we go. For some reason, the planer map previously broke it up into a bunch of little pieces, so just had to kind of come at it one more time. Again, Maya is going through some kind of growing pains these days. It's actually a little bit unreliable at times when it comes to modeling and UVs these days, but so if you get stuck or frustrated or feel like something's going a little buggy, chances are it's probably not you, it's probably the software. Okay, so I've got this thing. I can now kind of split this apart, cut the UV, so I technically should have, yes, 2 shells, right? This shell and this shell. So now that I've got the 2 shells, I can actually go polygons, unfold, right? And you see it's fairly well distributed. Do the same thing with the other piece. I'll go polygons, unfold. That's the palm side. So let me just undo and redo so you can see that. So it usually does a pretty good job. Sometimes I find with hands and stuff you might have to split or cut the little edges in the corner here. So like I might have to just go into the UV and say, well, let's cut those edges there. In the case of the fingernails, there's actually kind of a little claw sort of length here. And because there's such a huge change in angle, you see there's some weird distortion at the tips of the fingers, right? So what you may have to do is actually split off or cut the sides of that UV shell. Let me just show you the shell so you can see it. This one or this one? I think it's this one here. So yeah, if I go, let's say edge mode and go to this corner and this corner. By the way, I should turn on my display. Polygons, texture borders. Oh, I guess it was on display. Polygons, texture borders. I might make the display a little thicker, so I'll go polygons, display polygons, edge width, just so I can make this a little more visible, like so, right? A little more clear to see for you guys. So I'm going to go grab the edges at the kind of the corners of each sort of fingernail, right? So right there, just hit 4 so you can see that. So I'm selecting those kind of where there's a big turn, right? I want to kind of split that off, I think. So I'll simply go right click in the UV editor, cut, and watch what happens when I take this shell, right? Look at the tips of the fingers. When I go polygons unfold, it'll try to flatten this out with as little distortion as possible. So that's the underside of the nail now hanging out. And I get a little bit better texture underneath that nail, right? And a little bit better at the tip. Still a little warped, still a little distorted. So again, I want to minimize these seams as much as possible, but put them in places where they kind of make sense. I hope that sort of, I hope that's straightforward, but I think you guys may just have to try it out for yourselves too. Okay, so I'll keep going through the rest of the body here. So the torso, again, think of it like a shirt. So if I go to edge mode, I'll probably double click this edge, which actually quite nicely goes around most of the neckline. So yeah, let me, I'll just cut this right now. Oops. Sorry, in here I'll go cut UVs. And I'll take this maybe selection here, expand it out. Just grab these guys here. Okay, so I've grabbed that whole section. Yeah, let me just take this out. There. So I've got this sort of area isolated. I'll go to UV and just do, again, another planar map to kind of help establish that border, right, the texture border. I'll come back to the head in a second. If this character were to remain naked, I would probably try to follow the anatomy of the joint between kind of the hips, the leg, and the torso. So I'd probably follow along a line like this. In this case, I'll kind of treat him like he has pants. So maybe I'll follow along this line, let's say, to split this thing off. So I'm just shift double clicking when I can to try to get a loop around. And I'll just go to cut UVs. Actually, let me go to vertex, or sorry, face mode. And let's see. Oops. Yeah, let's just expand the selection here. Okay. So I'll deselect from here. So I'm just going to grab these loops like so. There we go. I want to make sure I'm not grabbing anything else by accident, like in the arms here, so I'll deselect those little regions. Let's see, because I don't want to create another accidental kind of UV cluster. So I'm just going to quickly grab this area. Okay, let's take a look. Oh, something in the neck. So I'll just very carefully deselect this stuff. Now what I usually do, I should have done this maybe earlier. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll do one giant planar map on the whole body after I delete things. Because right now the UVs are kind of non-existent on the rest of the body, which is why you're not seeing any checker pattern. So it's good to go to UV delete, but throwing a base planar map on everything kind of helps throw in some UVs to start when you want to start from scratch. So I'm struggling a little bit because I kind of missed that step actually, but okay, so let's just kind of establish his, he's got some high-waisted pants, I guess. If he's going to have pants. Okay, so this whole area now is kind of ready to go. I'll go in and just go planar map again, just to establish those borders, right? And if I go in, so let's check this out. If I go to edge, so I'll go from roughly this region down to here. So again, this is a general guideline. Imagine it like a t-shirt, right? You can kind of cut down those sides. So I go cut that and go to shell. This is the torso shell. Watch what happens when it unwraps or unfolds. So I go polygon unfold, and you see it kind of flattens it out. And if we look at the checker pattern, right, it looks pretty damn good. Again, shoulder t-shirts and shirts in general, they tend to have a seam across the tops of the shoulders. So I would naturally probably go in and say, well, let's find, let's say the top edges across here and here, I think would probably be okay, right? These two edges. So I'm going to cut those UVs, go back to shell, grab the two shell pieces, and when they unfold again, they'll be a lot more accurate to the kind of proportionality of the chest and everything, right? Super clean, nice texture, or nice checker, I should say. So what I was talking about, a planar map on everything else is like this, doing something like this. So just to establish some kind of UVs after you've deleted them, it's probably not a bad idea to just throw on a generic UV for the whole thing. So I should do this for the rest of the body just so I can kind of see the UVs in the workspace. They're totally wrong, but I can work on them from here. So next up would be kind of like the pant leg region. So we go around the ankle. You could go even a little higher. I tend to go right along what would be the sort of top border of the foot. So if we're seeing that, it's this border here, right? So if I shift right click, cut those UVs. The inseam, so if I grab, let's say from this ankle, click that edge, and then shift, double click on the equivalent edge across the way, should go all the way through, right? Shift, right click and cut. And watch what happens if I take the shell now. I'll take that shell, polygon, unfolds, and you see it actually generated a half decent checker pattern, right? Now, there's probably a bit more work to do on this. As you notice, this whole thing is like one giant cluster, right? So sometimes you can split through the, like if this thing were a character that actually wore pants, you could put a seam right through the middle, roughly where the zipper or the fly might be, or the stitch line for the pants or jeans or whatever. So I could split them naturally there. And I can go to shell, and I'll just re-unfold these again, so they'll be a little more optimized, less stretching, you'll see in a second. Unfold, right? So they laid out a lot better. All right, nice checker pattern. For the feet, I tend to take the bottoms, so let me just move this out of the way for a sec. So I'll go into face mode. Let's see, let's grab the bottom. Yeah, shift double click from here to here. To there. So I'm just kind of grabbing the sole portion. And I can literally just go UV planar, which in this case gives me a half decent snapshot. If I really want that distortion free, I'll go unfold them right after. And then for the rest of these pieces, so edge mode, again, if you look at most of your shoes, you'll tend to have a seam line in the back of the heel. So I'll just simply go into the viewport for that, cut those UVs. I'll grab that shell from the viewport. And if I go and fold that, it'll look something like this. Something super weird. Yeah, if you get this weird option, sometimes this will happen where things are kind of attached when they shouldn't be. You know, you'll have to maybe try... here, let me just see if I can grab this piece again. So I'll undo the move tool. Sometimes you'll have to hit unfold more than once. So I'll grab this piece again. And I'll go polygons, unfold again. There we go. So sometimes it's a little glitchy on the first try. But now you see I've got pretty much like a whole shoe or sock piece there, right? And again, the checker is nice and clean for the most part. So let me just double check that. Yeah, let's go unfold. And I think it's still being a little weird for whatever reason. Maya sometimes, I tell you. We'll try it one more time. Unfold. Oh, come on, Maya. You can do it, Maya. Yeah, for some reason it's being a little bit glitchy. So I'm going to deselect the area and try to select it again. Or maybe I'll try vertex or face selection. Or maybe a shell selection just right in the viewport. By the way, if you're dealing with issues like this, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just quickly do a quick layout to pack it all in so I can sort of see what parts I'm working on. So that weird foot region is this. The shell is being selected okay in the UV editor. For some reason it was being really weird and inconsistent in the viewport. So I'll just go via the UV editor in this case and then go to unfold. So now you see it gets that more correct layout. So again, like I said, mine's still a little glitchy in some spots, but so next up really is the head, right? Getting that head thing to work. So let's go back to layout again, repack this all real quickly. So the head is kind of like a Halloween mask of sorts, right? We kind of want to, generally speaking, what I wind up doing is I'll go to an edge from the back, and like a Halloween mask, it'll go somewhere up to the top of the head. If the character has hair or has a hat or a helmet or something that's hidden by this, or if there's a natural fold or something where it would make sense to put the seam, then I'll put the seam there. So I feel like this might be a wrinkle area, so I may put the seam there, but usually I'll cut a seam, you know, along the hairline. So let me just pull this back a bit. So I could go from here to here as well and put a seam. So watch what happens when I do that. I'm going to simply just shift right click and cut this. If I go to shell again and simply go polygons unfold, it's like magic. You see the mask appears, and if we look at the checker, right, do a little before and after. So this is before, all distorted and weird. After putting those simple cuts, we get a much better, right, much better checker. Now, it's still not clean. The reason being is that there's this giant mouth cavity. So sometimes when you have a character that has a mouth cavity, you know, sometimes the under region of the nose, we have to kind of split these little pieces off because there's such a big change in angle of the surface. It needs to be split. So oftentimes, even in a human character, I'll tend to split the bottom of the nose off. So in this case, I can go select that area, go shift, right click and say create shell, which will break that off. And I can always just unfold it as I go, right? So I'll just unfold that piece. So that is clean. It's not to scale yet, but I'll fix that in a minute. For the mouth, I'll tend to grab the mouth. So I'll try to find the mouth region here. Let's go edge mode. So I'm going to try to find, I think it's this edge loop here. So if I double click that, yeah, it just kind of hits the inner edge of the lips there. So if I shift right click and cut this off, which essentially creates a new shell, I can take this new shell piece, unfold it, and you see there's the mouthpiece, right? I could leave it as is. It's a little distorted. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll try to find an edge loop that comes in from the corner of the mouth. So something like this, I think, is what I remember from this morning. And I may want to keep this intact inside the back of the mouth, so I may just deselect the middle edges, shift right click and cut, And then when I go back to shell and unfold that, you see it gives you a very unique shape and is much more distortion free, right? So it actually stretches and lays things out. And if we go back to this piece, right, the rest of the head, this whole area should lay out a little better. We should see a little less distortion in the face. So if I unfold that, it'll look a heck of a lot better, right? The mouth shape is a little different. By the way, if you want to see distortion, there is a little preview for distortion, which is display UV distortion. When we turn this on, Maya may crash. I don't know if it's going to or not, but let's... Come on, Maya. Normally it won't bug out like this, but I guess my Maya's being a little touchy today. Point being, though, when you turn on distortion, what should happen is things that are fairly low distortion will look white. Things that are distorting in one direction or another may look either reddish or bluish purple. So that distortion option, yeah, it looks like my Maya's freezing, unfortunately. So I guess I'll pause the recording for a second. Yeah, I'll just show you, I guess, on this guy. This is a fairly nice character unwrap done by the artist Dominic Queck. So there's a bit of overlapping pieces here. I'll just show you that. But there's actually fairly little to no distortion in this whole model, which is really great in terms of the UVs. So if you're checking for distortion, though, you can turn on this little switch, and you guys can see the colors show up now, right? Now these very light pastel-y reds and blues are kind of acceptable and okay. It's when they get like really, really dark blue, dark red that there might be a problem. So let's say maybe in this shell, yeah, let's say this shell here is a little bit problematic.
What does dark red show?
Well, dark red or dark blue would show extreme distortion in the UVs, meaning that the texture might get stretched or warped in those areas. The red and blue indicates a direction. I don't remember which direction means what. So red means it's moving further out from the model or further inside the model if you were to compare it in a 3D way. But if I go polygons and unfold it, usually unfolding pieces will help yeah, kind of relax things out. For some reason this thing doesn't even want to unwrap, but so you know, for the most part this would be fairly acceptable, especially in something so complex. The textures should work for the most part, and yeah, I'd try to maybe lay these out a little better, but this mesh has a bit of a bug in it, which is preventing me, I think, from adjusting it. So I may have to go to mesh back to mesh cleanup, as I mentioned earlier. Hopefully fix that issue up, and then maybe I can, yeah, repack this stuff. Layout. There it goes. It's calculating. Now everything's laid out, and yeah, I can try to maybe try to re-unfold certain pieces to see. So if you see with the new unfold, it's way less distorted than it was before, right? So any pieces, that's why I really love the unfold tool, particularly for organic stuff. It just does a really, really good job of removing and minimizing distortion. So, and distortion happens when you basically have the UVs out of proportion compared to the model. So when you see, when I just pull parts of the model off, right, it creates that distortion. And if I pull it underneath, it might go red. So stuff that's just out of whack, out of scale, gets really dark blue. Stuff that's kind of folding under can go kind of red. So that's that little switch here, and you can turn that off and on. There's also yeah, kind of a UV shade toggle as well, but I don't find I use it that often. Anyways, let me undo all that. So yeah, I could actually probably hit unfold for all this stuff at once. It might take a while because it's dealing with a lot of mesh on a complex surface, and then I could simply go to layout again. And it'll rearrange everything in proportion, or at least it should. And you see we wasted very little space, and now look at the model, right? So you can even take existing unwraps. I don't want you to do that for the assignment. I want you to kind of delete the existing unwrap and create your own. But if you're working on a production, sometimes this happens. You're working as a modeler or an animator. You see a really bad unwrap, and you're like, oh, I'll just fix this and touch it up. So you could, in theory, do that in production. But yeah, for the purpose of this class, I want you guys to sort of check out what's in the library, or go to some of the websites that are out there. So a couple of the websites that you can go to for models. TF3DM is a good one. So this is TF3DM. There's lots of free. Oh, nice. There's the trash dove. Yay! That's like, man, all of a sudden this week that was like everywhere. Okay, and then there's Turbo Squid. Now Turbo Squid has a bunch of like models that are free. So there's a bunch that aren't free. So if you want to search, I don't know. Just let's say we type in character as a simple example. You know, there's a bunch there for a lot of money, but if you guys don't want to spend anything, you just go 0 to 0. Now, granted, keep in mind you will get what you pay for sometimes, so just be very careful about what you download. If you're not sure about the quality, I would prefer if you ask me to kind of help you